Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Writers Infusion. I'm your host, Susan. I'm here with Ed, Julie, Jen, and Dave. Today we are here to read an excerpt from a mystery. It's a short story. It's called Alyson, Holmes on the Job by Richard Santorelli, who is from Massachusetts. I'll read the summary and then Julie's going to read the story today. Summary: Alice Holmes investigates the murder of 3 teenage gypsy girls. The investigation will take her into a feud between families vying for control.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of man? That was the introduction to the American radio program, The Shadow. I definitely know the evil in the hearts of man, after 20 years on the job for the Met, one of the more popular names for Scotland Yard. My name is Alice Holmes, a chief inspector for the yard. Yes, the name is Holmes, and Sherlock was a distant ancestor. He was the younger brother of my 4th great-grandfather, Mycroft Holmes. My father, Jack, was a commander, and my grandfather, Rupert, was an assistant commissioner at the yard. I worked for the Homicide and Serious Crimes Command with one of the investigation teams. My latest case started when a call was received on 999 at 7 a.m. There were bodies found in Lambeth. Clark Benson, my commander, came to my office and told me I was assigned to investigate the apparent murders of 3 young women whose bodies were found in Norwood Park in the West Norwood residential area of Lambeth, one of the worst boroughs in London, but only 6th worst after Westminster for crime. Actually, I feel quite safe living in Westminster at 219 Baker Street, not far from Sherlock's old place. We had problems in Norwood Park because a group of immigrant gypsies camped there after being evicted from Marble Arch in Westminster, where they were causing the residents problems. I was reluctant to handle the case, but Commander Benson insisted. Chief Holmes, I expect you to carry on with your assigned duties. But sir, you know my parentage, and I respectfully decline. My grandmother was a gypsy and had a great influence on my life, which I believed could impact decisions I had to make dealing with the gypsies. Your parentage is precisely why you're being assigned, and of course your investigative skills, not to mention you're fluent in their language. The language I know is from the Welsh Gael. There are differences. I'm sure your skills will do well. Now let's get on with it. The bodies are waiting. No more arguments. And take Roberts with you. He needs more experience. Yes, sir. I stopped by Heather's desk. Heather, when everyone from my team comes in, tell them to meet me in Norwood Park on the Salters hillside. We got bodies. I went to James Roberts' desk. James, we got a case. Let's go. We got a marked Vauxhall Astra, left the Curtis Green building on Victoria Embankment and headed to West Norwood with siren blaring. On the way, I told James about West Norwood. West Norwood used to have a gypsy community in the 1700s around Gypsy Hill. A woman called Margaret Finch was the queen of the gypsies, used to live there around that time. People used to come there to have their fortunes read. I think these immigrant gypsies are trying to reestablish a community there. We headed over the Westminster Bridge, going toward Kensington Road. The siren helped, and the fact we could use the bus lanes. Getting over the bridge was easy till we hit the other side with traffic piled up everywhere. The buses were front to bumper, so I had to try to get around them. I told James, turn on the tenaway and give me the mic. I started yelling in it. Come on, Saab, get off the phone and move over. Police emergency. He forced right, almost hitting a bike rider. Other cars moved out of the way. I saw the entry to A23 Kensington Road, cut off 2 cars, barely missing their front bumpers. Cars coming the other way hit their brakes hard, with tires squealing. Once on the A23, we made good time. I moved around the obstacle course of cars. James had the handbar on the dashboard in a death grip, his face a bit pale. I turned my head to James. We're almost there. He sighed. Thank God, this time you didn't crash the car. That one wasn't my fault. Yes, of course. He rolled his eyes. We arrived at the park about 8 a.m. It was a sunny, clear spring day. Many songs of the birds that filled the park, and the scent of flowers everywhere. You could see central London 7 miles away, and many of the sights, such as the London Eye and the Shard. Police cars were everywhere, blocking off Salters Hill. News vans from the tabloids and TV stations were parked along Salters Hill. One of the reporters yelled at me, "Hey Holmes, how about a statement?" I pushed through the local residents and reporters that were hovering about the roped-off crime scene, a number of uniformed officers keeping order. On the campsite side, another group of people stood. A man was arguing with one of the officers. We found the medical examiner and a CSI team around the bodies, not far from the gypsy camp, which was in the center of the park. "What we got, Niall?" I said to our medical examiner, an older man with white hair and steel gray eyes. 3 young women, teenagers. Their throats have been slashed and their bodies mutilated. Their names are Nuri, Esmeralda, and Drina, according to their father. He's the one over there arguing with the officers. His name is Fonso, and he's the leader of the people here. The poor guy's really distraught. It took 2 officers to restrain him. What's the time of death? Give or take less than 12 hours. I'll know more once we get them back to the lab. I looked at the mutilations. There were a symbol carved on the girls' stomachs. I knew what the symbol meant. I saw one of the CSU guys I know. "How goes it, George?" "Not easy. This is a heavy used area. Too many footprints to be of use. A lot of runners use the park. Actually, it was a runner that called it in. A lot of trash from who knows who, but we have to bag it all. You never know what we could find." I would say this is a dump site and the girls were killed elsewhere. There's not enough blood around the bodies, and since they have no clothes, we're left with the bodies. Maybe we'll find something there back at the lab. I noticed he covered the hands and feet in plastic to preserve any material under the nails. "Thanks, George. Okay, James, it's time to talk with the father." I approached the man, who was still being restrained by 2 officers. He was yelling, "I want to see my daughters!" He was a tall man, over 6 foot, with dark skin and pitch black hair.
So, good premise for a story.
Yes.
A detective, female, gypsy, going to investigate the murder of 3 teenage girls, right? That summarizes that. So, I have a couple of main things I want to talk about. Let's start with the first sentence. So, who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of man? That's a common phrase, and as Ed had pointed out off camera, it's from America, right? And you want to start off your story in a unique way. And when you're using a phrase that's so common, at least for people who know it, I don't think that's a good way to start.
Right. Plus, I mean, this immediately limits the readership to people over 60 who have heard of the shadow and have heard of this quote, and it's incorrect, by the way. So, not a good way to start off. I was baffled by this story. I mean, it seems to be an interesting concept to talk about a female Sherlock Holmes. That's what he seems to be setting up. Alyson, or Alice, he uses the names interchangeably, Holmes. But he doesn't seem to make anything of it. I mean, if you've read the Holmes stories, you know what Sherlock Holmes is like. He's, kind of on the Asperger's spectrum somewhere, and has his own way of doing things. He would never go to a crime scene and ask other people what they had seen. Yes. He would go there and do his own examination and not talk to anybody. He would be gruff. He would speak very polished English, not like this woman. I don't know what she speaks. It's very rough kind of language. So I don't know what's going on. Why bring up the Sherlock Holmes thing if you're not going to follow through with it? I don't get it.
We know that the whole beginning of this story it's a lot of backstory that we see a lot, and you definitely don't need it. To me, the action starts. You could say it could be when she finds out that she has to go to the crime scene, but I really think it starts at the crime scene, because you have an interesting character and an interesting murder, if you can call it that. And so start there, because that's where I want to hear. I don't really care about the conversation that she has that gets her there. I definitely don't care about the ride in the car. The ride in the car, it's not like she's being chased or that's a necessary scene.
What's the hurry to get to a place where there are dead people?
Right, but you don't even care about the ride.
There's no hurry.
What you care about, right?
Yes.
You care about when you get there. I mean, why were they murdered and what happened and how are people reacting around them? That's what I want to know. So that's where I would start the story.
Yeah, I felt like there was just almost an overabundance, I don't even know if that's a word, of setting. It was like the author's trying to create a setting, but I don't know where, and many places are mentioned, but I don't know what those places are, so it doesn't create a visual for me. And I said the same thing as you, Sue. I think the story starts on page 3 when they arrive at the crime scene. The rest is backstory, which is important that the author know that, but I think all of it, could be cut.
And And something, if we were to critique the first couple of pages, and I've made notes here, but when they're talking to each other, the commander and Alice, it's so formal. And when you're telling someone to go out to a homicide scene, most of the time people are pretty choppy. You've got something going on, go out and do it. And instead, it's not like that. It's too proper, unless that's supposed to come from Sherlock Holmes. And then when you get to, even in the if you're talking about this scene, even if we are recommending that you don't need it, and you can use a scene like this later on. Obviously, she's going to be in the station. But when you're halfway down page 2, after she has the brief conversation with Commander Benson, then she stopped at Heather's desk and says something. We don't even know who Heather is, what she looks like, what the entire setting is around them. And then right to Jane Roberts' desk, and again, we don't have any clue as to, it's like a black space.
Well, when
right?
when her commander says, take Roberts with you, she goes to Heather's desk. So is this Roberts?
Right.
Is this Heather Roberts?
Right. You don't even need that.
So,
It's funny, I read this the first time. We have experience with Richard from the other group. And his writing was just burdened, weighted down with backstory and historical dogma, and on and on. My eyes rolled back in my head. This is much better than what we had previously read, like 90% better. It really read well. And I struggled through it the first time, but after the reading, maybe Julie did some magic, it sounded better. And given Ed's comments, which are very accurate, what if this story eliminated the Holmes aspect completely and had a unique individual, Alice, because what you're doing is you're weighting her against a very known subject. And if she doesn't match up to that very known subject, she's going to come out lacking.
Right.
So if you eliminate the Holmes completely, have her a special person with unique qualities, I think it'll work, because we're on the side of justice here. 3 slashed young girls, horrible. You can't miss with something like that. Now, it's the writer's skill that's going to get us over that hump and into the uniqueness of Alice as she pursues the bad guys. So I think there's potential here. You have to eviscerate the beginning of the story, in my opinion, and just put Alice out there. But you've got to come up with, because we know what Holmes is like, as Ed said. Holmes would come away with a specific, he wouldn't even talk to anybody. He would find something that no one else noticed and wow the reader as well as Dr. Watson. Alice doesn't do any of that, so she comes out in a bad light here.
And she is unique. She's a gypsy. She speaks a different language.
She has all kinds of possibilities.
Yeah, potential. Dave, I thank you for the compliment. I feel maybe I should have read it with a British accent. I wasn't sure as I was halfway through. I thought, I should have, and then I stumbled.
I wouldn't have understood.
Can you stumble over my way? I could do British. I hear Elvis Costello's Watching the Detectives in my mind. I was hearing that song playing in the background. I thought that Alyson or Alice, again, we're not sure which name you choose, reads like a male. I felt she was a male character. The way she approached people, the way people talked to her, even the reporter saying, "Hey, Holmes." I don't think a reporter would address a female with her last name alone. I don't know.
Well, she's a detective, though.
She is a detective. I
So
know,
that
but
puts her in a different category.
She
Well,
doesn't
maybe
reply
True.
to the reporter. The
That
reporter
is
says something, that's the last we hear of that.
That is true.
That-
She
it goes on with
approaches
the
Nigel.
system.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I wanted to quote Joe Friday from Dragnet, "Just the facts, ma'am," because we need more detective interaction. We need conversations between detectives. We certainly need Alyson Holmes to discover something, to interact with someone, to interview the father. We need conversations here to really.
Well, that may be
feel.
down the line.
Yes, I agree. Yes.
You know, it's coming on. We've only got 5 pages.
Yes.
But Sue's right, where the story starts when we have dead bodies. That's where a murder mystery starts. Everything else is superficial.
And the fact that they're naked is delayed. We don't get that at the onset. We don't hear about that at the police station, and we don't hear it till we're well into the crime scene.
Right.
There are
Seemed odd.
bodies, there's evidence,
That
and
should have
we
been
don't
in-
have clothes.
Yeah.
They don't have
The sergeant who sent, or whoever it is that sent her out there, said that should be part of the investigatory statement.
Absolutely.
Not just dead, dead, naked, mutilated with symbols
Yes.
on
What
it.
are those symbols?
right
I'd like
away.
at least to describe those.
And we get teased. She knew what the symbols meant.
But it doesn't.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Carry on. Tell us more.
Don't tell us
Yes.
you know and not
Yes.
tell us.
Yes.
You know, that's
Yeah.
just bad writing. I mean, but again, going back to Richard's original stories, this is much better. There's far more potential here. He's eliminated 90% of the laden history and backstory.
Now, there's something in here that I just want to mention, and that is that to the Romani people, they consider a gypsy to be a derogatory term. So
That's right.
They
the
don't want
fact
to be
that
called. Yes.
exactly. So the fact that they're being called gypsies, it's like that's a red flag from
Yeah, I
from
was
the
wondering
beginning.
if that was almost like a racial slur.
Especially-
I didn't know.
That
but-
came up in a previous
Episode.
show we
Another
did.
story, yeah,
Mhm.
that lady in
Especially
in the bed.
if her grandmother was Romani, so
Then she wouldn't
she
say
would
that.
know
Yeah,
more than
yeah.
anybody.
That's a
Yeah.
good
Yeah,
point.
I didn't know it was
So-
a derogatory term. I thought it was
And
like
she can, and that's a good time
It's
for her.
something to be
I think it's almost like a racial
sensitive
slur.
about.
Is it
Right,
really?
yes. And we can have her think that. So maybe they're calling them gypsies, and because that's her background, she's thinking she doesn't like hearing that term.
Right,
Yeah.
that's right.
And
But she
that's-
uses it.
Right, so
Yeah.
that's a problem.
Yeah, so that's
So
that's
the
an
other
issue.
thing too is that I didn't get a lot of emotion in this story, especially
No.
if she is a gypsy or whatever, and that's her people, and she's having to go to a crime scene like this. She must feel something. And I know this has come up before. It doesn't mean she has to show it because it's her job to remain cool, but she can be thinking something.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And she's not thinking anything. I just don't
Yeah.
have any emotion.
No reaction
None
whatsoever
at all.
to
Yes.
it.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
anyone would react
if
to
there
that.
is no reaction, the author has to say she has been so inured to the horrors of
Yes.
murder and
Yeah.
blood and so on that but he's got to explain that to us.
Yeah.
But actually, it would be
Apart-
good that this is something different. That maybe she's usually like that, but this is affecting her in a
Yeah,
different
okay,
way.
well, that's,
But even Sherlock Holmes, if he comes across something horrifying, he'll say it's horrifying. He'll say like,
Right.
this is, we have a horrifying scene here, Watson, or something like that.
Right.
He'll make a statement about it, even if he
yeah,
himself
he would
is not
comment, this is the
personally
most demented
horrified.
murder I've seen. And,
Yeah,
yeah, he'd make comments.
exactly.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So,
Grammatically speaking,
Oh.
there are a lot of run-ons.
Yeah.
A lot of run-on
Yeah.
sentences, so be careful. I corrected
I
some, and
did
some I just
too.
marked as run-ons. And some repetition with, well, first off, the area is the worst in town. Worst after Westminster. Actually, I feel quite safe in West. Why? Why is Holmes living there if it's one of
that
the
seemed like a
worst places?
strange.
Yeah, it doesn't even
I just
matter.
crossed-
I just
Yeah.
I
So I want
crossed
to
out the
know
whole
what
first
if an alarm, a dog, a strong neighbor. But on page 2, West Norwood. We headed to West Norwood. I told James about West Norwood. West Norwood used to have a gypsy community, in quotes. So tighten that. West Norwood is mentioned 3 times. I filled James in a little location.
That
that
can
whole
help.
paragraph
Too
is a
much.
problem.
Too much.
Right.
It's trumpeted out there. Who says it? Why is it there? You're telling the reader who these people are. It's not the way to get information out.
It should come out
That's the kind of
later,
thing that
right?
he used to do all the time.
Also, it's like
you
the
know-
1700s. It's like, well, what relevance could this possibly
I
have?
know.
Right. That's
Yes.
that's showing someone
What's
did
going on.
research that they
Yes.
want to include in
Also,
this story.
it's not consistent because, earlier it says that at the bottom of the first page it says they're in Norwood Park because they were evicted from Marble Arch in Westminster. Okay, and then on the second page it says, I think these immigrant gypsies are trying to reestablish a community there. They're not trying to reestablish a community. They were thrown out of the other place. That's why they're there. They
Right.
didn't seek to be in this place.
right.
Don't they roam anyway? I mean, do you establish a community of gypsies, but don't they travel from here to the other? I don't know.
You got me.
I don't know.
Yes, I think that was
The other thing that struck me is that there's the use of the word restraint when they're talking about the dad. So he's got these are 3 of his daughters. Like he's lost 3 daughters, possibly all of his children, and there's just the use of the word arguing with the police, restraining
Yes.
him.
He's
It
destroyed.
just seems very not
Frantic,
compassion.
Distant,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, like this. I think maybe the wording is wrong there, but
thought the same
I would
thing.
think that there would be more compassion. But to say that he was still restrained, like is, I don't know.
That's
It,
not
that just,
right.
it kind again, these are things that pull me out of the
Yeah.
story. The too much setting, the set, naming too many places, it pulls me out of the story. And just in defense of Richard, I liked Richard's prior stories with the story about the diary, the girl with the diary. I liked his medieval fantasy that he
Yeah,
that he
fantasy,
wrote.
yeah.
I don't remember this story, but.
Well, getting back to language, we got bodies, we got a case. I don't know that a detective would use, I don't know that a Brit would use got. We got a case.
It's out of my
Well,
world.
they don't sound British at all.
No.
Yeah, they don't
Maybe
sound
that's why I didn't do the accent. They don't sound British.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, start at the right place. And in some cases, you're right, there's too much setting. And in other cases, there's no setting. Like when he
Yeah.
goes up to a desk and you have no clue as to what's going around.
Yeah.
More emotion, and at least in thoughts, as to what Alice is thinking. And
Especially where this is a short story. I mean, every word has to
Right.
count.
Oh, that's right. It is
It's a short story. It's not a
Yes,
novel. So
yes.
to have 2 pages of backstory and setting, just get to the story, get to the meat, get to the good stuff.
Right, that's
Really.
right.
I vote for the name Alyson rather than Alice.
Allison.
Allison, I
I
go with that too.
agree. Hey, Elvis Costello has a song, Allison. We're all
It's
set.
true.
There you go.
All right.
Does anyone have anything else to bring up?
No, I think there's an improvement over what I'd read of his stuff before. So, in my opinion, he's going in the right
good.
direction.
That's good.
And I'm wondering if James Roberts is her Watson. Do you think he's going to be her Watson?
Not yet,
Good question.
because
I don't see it.
they don't seem to hang together, and there's no camaraderie there.
Well, again, if
Okay.
he adds that into the story, some emotion and a little
Yeah.
bit something,
Right.
then maybe he could be. Right?
Very good.
Okay. All right, well, Richard, thank you for submitting. We hoped that our comments today will help you with a rewrite at all if you decide to do that. And thank you, everyone else, for joining us for this episode of Writers Infusion. We will see you next time. Keep writing.